A documentary investigation into the invisible triad that won battles for the Sherman: jam-resistant FM radio, block-for-block repair, and synchronized artillery strikes. How a system, not a duel, turned the tank into the engine of the advance and left lessons for the future. In motion, a Sherman is not just steel, gasoline, and track, it's a network. The engine growls, the turret shivers, rubble flies, and the front line bends. But the crew doesn't hear the roar of war so much as voices. The platoon leaders clipped orders, the forward observer's dry report, the senior driver's reply from the next rise. Radio turns a single tank into a node in a system, and systems know how to win. America's shift to frequency modulation, FM, wasn't just a hardware swap. It was a change in the quality of command. In the static of AM sets, half words and half seconds vanish, and seconds decide who sees first, coordinates first, and hits first. FM filters atmospheric and industrial interference far better, delivering a clean voice in the rain and over fields where your own batteries are thundering. Once company and platoon commanders had stable voice channels, tactics stopped relying on pre-scripted plans and pivoted to live, real-time rewrites of the fight. Radio stopped being a gambler's telephone and became the organ of control. Standardized networks locked in that advantage. The SCR 508-528 family of tank radios spoke a common language of channels. Frequencies stepped out, channel numbers tabulated, microphones and headsets unified, and on-air procedures spelled out to the point of boredom. A commander didn't have to guess which net the neighboring company was on. The plan was agreed in advance. Call signs and exchange formats were the same, from Normandy to the Saar. A platoon shifted from road to battle without radio guesswork or free-for-all chatter. A company commander heard 3 platoons like 3 clear instruments and could play them without cacophony. The key inside the hull was the intercom. In a Sherman, the crew talks through headsets plugged into a switch box. The gunner hears the commander even when the recoil hammers the turret. The loader when the ammo rack bangs his shoulder, the driver who in the hull sings in 4th gear. Orders shrink to Right 10, AP, Fire, Move, and they don't drown in metal. There's nothing romantic about the intercom, but it saves seconds, and seconds save tanks. That inward quiet couples to the outer net. A typical Sherman platoon is a small, distributed radio node. The commander's tank holds the company net, and if needed, can reach higher. The other tanks keep the platoon net and listen for orders, preserving discipline on the air. Infantry and artillery have their own portables, often on different frequencies, but the seams are bridged. A liaison tank, a forward observer with an extra set, a command observation post where several nets converge. Result: infantry, tanks, artillery stops being a one-off feat by a gifted organizer and becomes a standard operation.
In practice, it looks prosaic, and it works. The column drops off the road, the company commander announces the line, platoons get sectors and time marks. First contact and the routine ritual already runs. Report by reference points, a brief observer's note, a request for fires on the net, confirmation of the time on target. Meanwhile, the second platoon is already swinging around the copse because it can hear and understand where the opening is. Radio erases the blind gap between initiative and coordination. Everyone acts on their own, inside a shared picture, and the picture holds. Comparisons with opponents aren't cartoons. German armored units had a serious school of radio and discipline, but they more often worked on AM and relied on less unified inter-branch nets. Soviet forces, especially early in the war, suffered from shortages of sets and uneven distribution. The American edge didn't come from merely having radios, but from a massive standardization, procedures that matched from staff vehicle down to individual platoon. That sustained a high tempo and shifted effort to where it decided the outcome. Radio also changes a commander's psychology. Being able to talk constantly with subordinates makes decisions under uncertainty easier. You can test a hypothesis, refine the picture, reassign a task. A Sherman freezes at crossroads less often. A tank with thinner armor and a middling gun suddenly turns up in the advantageous spot because it was steered there in time, and it hears everyone it needs when it needs them. A technical feature becomes an operational one. Instead of hunting for the perfect tank versus tank encounter, you hunt for the point where the network, not the metal, decides. The steel network has a material side too. Standardized sets are easier to surface, simpler to swap block for block, faster to train on. Training centers push out streams of crews who then slot into any company without pain. Sockets, plugs, channel tables are identical. A set dies, the repair guy has the exact counterpart, the depot, the needed module, the manual, a step-by-step troubleshooting map. Not heroism, industrial culture, the kind that makes heroics unnecessary. And don't forget radio discipline. Radio tempts you to ramble. The American school clamps that into crisp, discrete messages. A platoon leader doesn't lecture. He stacks a queue of orders that are easy to acknowledge and impossible to misconstrue. Copy and silence to catch the next link. That speaking style is a weapon too. It lowers cognitive load, freeing attention for scanning and laying the site. The final effect is speed in the observe, decide, act cycle. FM links, a shared net, and the intercom stitch time together. Fewer delays to interference, fewer say again, fewer internal shouts. A platoon jumps faster from report to fire, a company from idea to maneuver, a battalion from concept to execution. Added up, that yields the invisible edge that rarely makes the poster silhouette, but often explains who wins the fight. The future. American armor won not only at the front line, but in its shadow, where the smell of hot metal mixed with kerosene and a welding arc mattered as much as a gun sight. A tank that died yesterday in a Normandy hedgerow could be back in the line tomorrow. That magic rested on the Ordnance service, recovery, repair, adjustment, record-keeping, and the unsentimental logic of block-for-block swaps. A system where every hour was scheduled and every crack became a task with a time standard.
It all began with recovery. On the battlefield, crews dragged a wounded Sherman into cover or through smoke to wait for a wrecker. Tow cables, snatch blocks, improvised tackle came out. Sometimes a neighboring tank served as an anchor, sometimes a roadside oak. That forest of cables strung between vehicles and hedgerows became normal, from the Normandy beaches to the Ruhr. The scene's main character was the armored recovery vehicle on a Sherman chassis, the M32 ARV. A folding A-frame boom, a powerful winch, jacks and ground anchors let the crew haul a knocked-out tank from a ditch, change a road wheel, lift the power pack, reseat the turret, and, if luck held, start the engine right there. The M32 worked close to the front, under fire, at night, in rutted trails left by half-tracks and tractors, with lights off and cat's eye markers glowing on the fenders. Next came organizational-level repair at battalion and division. Tank and infantry divisions had light ordnance maintenance companies, mobile shops on wheels with lathes, presses, welders, generators, and stocks of standard parts. The flow was simple. A vehicle arrived, got a diagnosis, was officially deadlined, taken out of service, and assigned a repair card noting scope and target time. Standards weren't wishes, they were a contract with reality. Hours to replace a final drive, to true a turret race, to overhaul a gearbox. Numbers varied case by case, but the discipline didn't. Break the job into operations, assign people and tools, mark completion. The sheer numbers of Shermans turned repair into a production line. Standardized assemblies and interchangeable parts let units act rough but effective. If an engine wheezed and smoked, you didn't rebuild it in a ditch, you swapped it whole and sent the old one to the rear for depot overhaul. Same for transmissions, sights, radios, and generators. The block-for-block policy saved hours on site, and hours added up to battalion combat power. When the clock was brutal, they cannibalized.
stripping living organs from a total loss to revive the tank that could fight today. It's not a pretty word, but it's an honest wartime practice, baked into the books. Every removed part was logged, and the donor marked as beyond repair or slated for deep rebuild. Normandy was the exam. Dense hedgerows, narrow roads, mines, and artillery broke suspensions and turret gear as often as armor-piercing hits. In the first weeks after the landings, maintenance companies ran a non-stop receiving ward, tents dug in workshops, welding under canvas in night shifts. A typical case, in the evening, an M32 drags 2 Shermans out of the trees. By midnight, mechanics have the damage to tracks and road wheels off. In the morning, they hoist in a new final drive. By noon, the tank runs a local shakedown and rolls off for refuel in Borside. The second tank is worse, onto a transporter and back to the divisional shop where stationary machines take over. In 24 hours, half the graveyard drives out, another third waits on parts, the rest become donors. By the next phase line, the battalion doesn't look exhausted. It has digested its own losses.
The recovery route was tiered. The riskiest belt was the forward collection of damaged vehicles, handled by crews and platoon mechanics. A bit farther back sat the service point that decided faiths. Fix on site, return to company/battalion, or push to the divisional maintenance point. If it needed depth, the tank moved to corps or army level, closer to big shops and depots. Heavy tractors and tank transporters handled long hauls without adding damage. Each echelon had its own standards and boundaries to keep the flow from clogging. Paradoxically, the brightest victories came not from sudden lunges forward, but from the steady pulse of this pump shuttling machines back and forth. Accounting cemented this system. Ordnance paperwork, repair cards, tags on vehicles and assemblies, ledgers of issues and receipts. Dull but life-saving language. Without accurate records, you can't plan resupply, and without resupply, block for block becomes a slogan. Material officers counted road wheels, track pins, hoses, oils, and filters as carefully as gunners counted shells. Standardization helped again. One radio family, one filter set, shared parts catalogs, unified tools. Logistics and repair fused into a single organism. Speed reshaped commanders' behavior. If a battalion knows its wounded tanks will be back the day after tomorrow, risk in today's operation is computed differently. That's the strategic dividend of the maintenance base. It turns losses into a temporary variable, not an irreversible constant. In American practice, this worked alongside the artillery umbrellas and radio nets because recovery would catch up. You could build pressure faster because repair wouldn't lag. By the end of the European campaign, maintenance areas ran with near-industrial routine. In the Ruhr, where the roads lie comfortably in the rear, heavy maintenance companies set up full-blown yards with diagnostic lines, cranes, and their own deep stock lines. Swapping a power pack was a weekday chore, replacing a turret bearing a standard job. Rebuilding fan blades, a matter of hours. The whole cycle from failure to return to service shrank to the minimum the situation allowed. Where the situation didn't allow it, the cycle stretched but didn't break. Donors rolled in, cards were rewritten, columns of supply caught up, and the yard snapped back to normal. This system has few romantic heroes, but a lot of everyday heroism. Motor sergeants with scorched sleeves, welders peering through dark glass, radio men swapping a set in a wet turret, record drivers crawling through the mud under sporadic, mean fire. They don't make posters, but their contribution is brutally measurable. A division that can lose dozens of tanks and return a big share in days keeps its striking core. That was the Sherman's hidden advantage. It wasn't designed as a solitary ideal, but as a component in a large, repairable civilization. The forward glance writes itself. The principles proven in Normandy became the inheritance of post-war armies. Modular units, interchangeability, firm standards, echelon recovery, disciplined accounting. Today's maintenance chains look eerily like those that hauled Shermans from hedgerows with a harp of tow cables.
As hardware grows more complex and costly, these principles only intensify. Victory belongs not just to the side that shoots harder, but to the side that returns faster after being hit. In that sense, the maintenance base isn't the back lot, it's the heart of tempo. And while the heart beats, armor have a chance to live longer than a single duel.
A forward artillery observer sits on a Sherman's armor like on a moving balcony. Beneath him, vibration. Ahead, the line of hedgerows. In his hands, the SDR-300 backpack radio. This isn't a walkie-talkie for chatter. It stitches the battlefield into a single scheme. The observer sees the target. The tank gives position. Infantry whispers in his headset about a machine gun on the farm's second floor. And in the rear, the battery is already laying its guns. Bound by voice, they bend time. The secret of speed is simplicity and discipline. The SER-300 works in the VHF band with frequency modulation. The voice is clear, the commands are short. The observer is the link between the front edge and the artillery command post, or CP. He doesn't ask for fire, he formalizes a task, so the battery becomes an extension of his eyes. A tight request format saves seconds and lives. A typical grid scene. A platoon of Shermans dives into a clearing. A flash on the right, bullets trim the leaves. Pressed to the turret hatch, the observer picks a reference. The crossroads house by the stone wall, and drops his gaze to the map. On his strap, mapboard and ruler. In his head, the field manual algorithm. He keys the handset. Oliva 1, Oliva 1. This is Vuga 3. To the battery. Immediate. Grid 293.4, 614.1. Target, machine gun position, second floor of the farm by the road. Crew under cover, muzzle flash and dust observed. Request, battery fire, HE, instantaneous fuses, corrections on me, control on command. That one sentence has everything: who's talking to whom, where the target is, what it is, with what and how to hit, who closes the loop. No lyricism. The artillery CP acknowledges, asks for wind and visibility, and, to be safe, cross-checks coordinates against the reference. The observer adds, offset from reference Dom Carmen, 120 right, 180 over. The offset from known point format makes life easier for tables and brains alike. Next, the invisible math shop comes alive. At the CP, the observer's data lands on a plotting table. The plotting director assigns a battery, 6 light howitzers, and runs the firing tables. Range, azimuth, propellant temperature, deflection, elevations. Actual wind comes from the meteorological report. Altitude correction from the contour map. The key parameter is time of flight. Without it, you can't build time on target. Time on target sounds like magic, but it's built from arithmetic and clocks. First, the CP sets a common impact time, say 10:07:30. Then, for each gun, it computes the time of flight of the first round and subtracts it from that H time. Each tube gets a different moment to fire. Gun number 1, with a 28-second flight, must fire at 10:07:02. Gun number 4, whose shell needs 33 seconds, at 10:06:57. The command goes to the battery, crew sync watches. On the armor, the observer hears the dry report. Time set, battery ready, confirming on net. Why is it devastatingly effective? The enemy hears the whistle only once. Too late. There's no first ranging round to warn him and buy seconds to run. 6 shells arriving within a single second break nerves, roofs, and plans. If the Ned carries 2 batteries, the picture gets even denser. Ideally, the observer never sees a first burst, he sees a salvo.
But you still climb one short rung of adjustment. The observer takes the first packet, not a full salvo, 2 or 3 rounds, and issues corrections. He speaks the field manual language. Wind from my right, drift 60 over 100, right 10, add 10. The numbers are hundreds in the grid. 10 are tens on the correction scale. The CP runs the correction, changes settings, and reports ready for the main haulie. Sometimes the target is soft and 1 battery suffices.
Sometimes it's hard. Then they add delayed action HE or switch to proximity airburst over the roof. When the appointed second arrives, time becomes physical. The observer checks his watch. 10:07:25, 5 seconds. 10:07:29. Inhale. 10:07:30. Bursts stitch the farmhouse roof and the stone wall into a single ribbon of dust. The machine gun goes silent. Figures dash from the doorway. The second salvo blankets the garden. The observer calls, "Target suppressed, shift fire 200 over, barn facade, rate on readiness." The frontal maneuver continues. The tanks move forward to that rhythm as if under a metronome. In this orchestra pit, the SCR-300 is the concertmaster. Small and finicky, but it delivers the one thing that matters, an interference-free conversation. Its whisper carries from turret roof to battalion CP, and from there by wire to the battery or via a radio bridge onto the corps net. When the observer's backpack and the Sherman carry different sets, he becomes the relay between nets, so infantry, tanks, and artillery keep the same beat. That radio bridge isn't a stunt, but a daily routine. A jumper cable into the turret hatch, a headset over the tank helmet, and disciplined pauses so people don't trample each other on the air. The CP's kitchen matters too. It's not just a tent. There are map tables, plotting boards, slide rules, switchboards, time check instruments. The fire direction officer sits there with adjusters beside him, and farther back the signalers who hold multiple lines at once, battery, battalion, observeress, adjacent units. The decision is collective but instantaneous. Whoever's closest shoots stops being the rule. The shooter is the one who can deliver the required time on target. Geography bows to the clock. The manual gives the observer a language that eliminates ambiguity. A field-style insert sounds like this. Identification, view log of 3. Warning to the battery, immediate. Location, grid 293.4614.1. Target, dome common. Offset 120 right, 180 over. Description, machine gun, second floor, crew under roof, likely stone walls. Method of engagement, HE, instantaneous, expenditure, battery. Method of control, fire on command, corrections by observer. Then comes the laconic work, receipt, acknowledge, ready for volley, static, shift, end of mission. There's no room for emotion in this telegraph style, and that's why the system rides out chaos. This chapter is about World War II, but the gaze points forward. The TOT principle lives today in digital networks. The observer is now a sensor, the CP an algorithm, the watches synced by satellite. The logic is unchanged. Compress time, multiply effect, strike together. Walkie-talkies became tablets, paper cards became software, and the Sherman's role as a mobile observer platform is now played by armored vehicles with stabilized cameras. Mechanics haven't erased the human. You still need someone to notice, decide, and say exactly as much as needed.
The conclusion is plain and stubborn. Linking the front to the artillery's rear by radio gives the tank not just a shield, but a long arm. A fast call for fire, a precise flight time solution, a simultaneous salvo. This is how you turn "we're under a machine gun" into "we're moving on." That's how you win not isolated duels, but the tempo of campaigns. And tempo, then as now, is a weapon. On wartime posters, a tank proves itself in a fair duel. 2 silhouettes, an open field, 1 perfect shot. In the real world, the Allies won differently, like an orchestra. Infantry talks to tanks, tanks to artillery, engineers cut lanes, medics already know the safe corridor, logistics brings what keeps the tempo alive. It's a system whose main verbs are suppress, bypass, and finish. Duels were left to the chroniclers, strong points were broken by fire and maneuver. A typical episode. An infantry company, some riding, some on foot, approaches a village. The tank commander company stays in touch with the battalion, and the air is filled with confirmations as short as metronome clicks. A Sherman with a forward observer moves up, Their job is a picture of the terrain and resistance nodes, not heroics. Where the machine gun is, where the AT gun sits, where the breach in the stone wall is, where a turret can swing, all of it becomes coordinates, markers, and requests for fire on command. Rule 1. Don't argue head-on with a machine gun. If an MG rings from a facade, the tank doesn't start a duel on a narrow street. It throws smoke, fires HE into the window frames, and calls a battery. Nearby, the infantry aren't passengers, but eyes and hands. They sprint to the wall, pop a smoke grenade at the corner, and point the way through the courtyard. Communication is the nerve of the scene. The infantry leader speaks on a portable set, a platoon of Shermans hears them, the artillery CP hears them. Phrases are short and standardized. Reference point, offset, target type, method of engagement, on me or on command. While the battery prepares a time on target, the tanks, never presenting a flat angle down the street, covered the assault team with short bounds. One holds the intersection and rear sector, a second slices upper floors with machine guns, a third slips deeper to counter a likely AT aperture. Turrets turn, but there's no wasted verbiage on the net. Suppressing, shift, set. Engineers aren't decoration, they're the teeth of the transmission. They cut wire, blow doors, lay bridges over ditches, fill shell holes, and mark safe tracks. Their work happens under an umbrella. The battery smothers firing nodes, the tanks crush points of resistance, the infantry seizes the yard and digs in. Sometimes the team adds a flamethrower tank or a 105mm Sherman to unpack stone nests when standard HE isn't enough. Even then, tempo rules. As long as the team keeps moving, the enemy can't re-aim AT guns, bring out Panzerfausts, or untie initiative. Why did the Allies avoid tank versus tank duels? Well, that's exactly what the enemy wanted. The German school prized ambush, the long first shot, and control of a long straight. In that logic, any tiger turns a block into a shooting gallery. The answer is simple. Don't fight on someone else's terms. The Sherman's task is not to beat a tiger in a penetration chart, but to bring the system to a place where the tiger is just a mark on the target grid. When the position is smoked, when the flank is cut off by infantry, when engineers open another door, the heavy tank loses the magic of distance and becomes vulnerable to massed fire and maneuver.
Artillery in this play is both the main hammer and the conductor of time. It wasn't hoarded for the decisive battle. It was called whenever concrete, AT guns, or dense MG webs blocked the way. The massed fire of a battery is cheaper than a company of tanks stuck at a crossroads. Time on target gives those seconds of breathless roof where the first salvo doesn't warn but breaks. A creeping barrage pushes defenders out of comfortable courtyard niches. Smoke cuts line of sight and covers the flanking move. The key, fire isn't a separate concert, it's part of the attack's breathing. Tanks and infantry know when to hug the ground, when to rise, when to change direction, to avoid their own bursts and immediately exploit them. Infantry doesn't hide behind armor, it makes the armor see. An infantryman spots a Panzerfaust at the hedge before the turret can swing. He radios the shift in danger, points to a breach where the tank can stick its nose in and crumble a wall with a track. In return, the tank is generous with fire, short bursts into attics, HE into embrasures, shrapnel into inner courtyards. This micro-choreography rests on discipline. No one wanders into another sector, no one clutters the net, no one lingers in a kill lane longer than a single shot requires. Radio organizes the phases. The company commander doesn't try to run every doorway, he sets the tempo. Suppression, seizure of key points, clearance, reorientation. In Phase 1, the main axis is tanks, the double-arrow artillery, and the observer's voice. In Phase 2, the infantry fights the small war and asks for pinpoint corrections. In Phase 3, engineers and medics synchronize the rear. In Phase 4, they prep for counterattack. The battery already has a matrix of emergency targets, tanks take intersections in a diamond, infantry seeds the approaches with mines. It sounds dry, but that dryness saves lives. Clear words, clear roles, clear minutes. The economics of battle is another argument against duels. Losing a tank in a city alley means a week of repairs and crew risk. A crate of shells will be restocked tomorrow. Better to burn 10 minutes of ammo,
then load 4 crews into ambulances. Allied logistics allowed them to pay with shells for safe tracks and lives, and standardized radio nets and procedures made that trade fast and predictable. Rationality, not timidity, dictated the habit. Call fire first, then look through the tank sight. There's also a culture of movement. The Allies tried not to go single file in a pipe, but as a fan. 2 platoons stretch across the front, a third in reserve to flank and exploit. Each element had pre-briefed rally points and pockets to take cover under their own fires. Moves were short, by bounds, with frequent changes of angle so the enemy never got a long, clean shot. Even in open country, tanks rarely stood, they lived, spoiling an AT observer's aim with small shifts and track-kick dust. In a village, that life became a series of jumps from wall to wall so the turret was never where it was expected. Sometimes a strong point must not only be suppressed, but broken. Then the assault group steps in. A 105mm Sherman, a squad of engineers, a machine gun pair, a flamethrower. Their aim is to cut a hole for the company to pour through. Smoke, short distance, speed, merciless time control. The assault lasts minutes, not hours. The key is unchanged. Don't let the enemy play his game. A village falls not because one tank wins a duel, but because the whole war machine breaks resistance at its joints in sync.
The conclusion is clear. A combined attack isn't tanks plus infantry, but a linked organism. Artillery fire is the blood, radio nets the nerves, tanks the bones and muscle, infantry the eyes and hands. The Allies prevailed when this physiology worked. The target first went blind and deaf, then lost shape, and only then did the men in helmets walk up. The forward look is inevitable. Modern operations are faster and more technical, but the principle holds. Don't argue in a duel when you can rewrite the scene itself. Victory loves systems. Systems love tempo. Tempo loves communication. One more simple truth about tempo. When the links ring together, a commander gains the freedom to improvise. He can change the axis of attack on the move because the battery will shift fire in a minute. Throw the reserve into a gap because the infantry's voice will keep that gap alive. Pull out a damaged tank and get it back tomorrow because recovery and repair won't be late. Thus, the noise of battle becomes the rhythm of the advance. And in that rhythm, the Sherman stops being a loner with a gun and becomes a node in the network that does the main thing, pushes the line forward. History loves sensation, war loves arithmetic. In popular memory, the Sherman often appears as a death trap, a Ronson, an easy prey for heavily armored opponents. In the archives, the same tank looks different, unromantic, but with a steady return to battle tempo, high repairability, disciplined communications, and fire support that broke strongpoints faster than myths could harden. The gap between legend and practice is filled by numbers, procedures, and the sober logic of operations. The first layer of debate is crew survivability. The Ronson myth blamed fires on gasoline, as if it ignited at a mere glance through the armor. The technical picture is duller. The main cause of fires was ammunition cook-off after penetration, not fuel. Until the summer of 1944, shells and cartridges sat in racks in side bins without wire protection, so hits near the stowage often became fires. After the introduction of so-called wet stowage, the probability of fires dropped sharply. It wasn't the myth that changed, but the design. Water jackets, surround ammo bins, relocation of stowage, and new loading practices did the work. Add crew discipline, keeping turret racks full and hull racks empty before combat. No magic, just engineering and procedure. The second argument is duels between opponents and armor penetration tables. Comparing Sherman and Tiger by caliber and millimeters of frontal plate is elegant and methodologically wrong. The Allies rarely forced head-on duels where the enemy's long-range advantage could fully unfold. Their doctrine emphasized integration. The tank as a mobile node in a network, artillery as the main hammer, infantry as eyes and hands, and engineers as the keys to the doors. In that system, the decisive metric wasn't maximum penetration at some sterile range, but the speed of the cycle's spot, call, suppress, bypass.
Even the growing share of 76mm guns on later Shermans didn't change the essence. Most rounds fired were HE at windows, trenches, and AT grooves, not enemy turrets on the horizon. Controlled massed fire won battles, not cartoonish one-on-one duels.
The third block is reliability and return to service. Here, the Sherman was an awkward opponent, not because of armor, but because of mechanical stubbornness. A straightforward transmission, proven power packs, access to assemblies, standardized components and wiring, and broad commonality of radios and instruments all made repairs predictable. Block for block wasn't a slogan, it was normal. Swapping an entire power pack was faster than overhauling it in place. A knocked-out tank often became not a permanent loss, but a temporary variable the Ordnance folks resolved in a day or two. In aggregate, a unit could go from fewer in the morning to enough by evening, and the tempo of the advance didn't collapse after the first hits. The fourth knot is what losses were actually made of. In popular imagination, tanks die to other tanks. In practice, a significant share of kills came from anti-tank guns, mines, and Panzerfaust ambushes at short range. Artillery raids and air power contributed less by direct destruction than by breaking unit cohesion and stealing the defender's time to maneuver. That threat structure explains why the Allies favored artillery and smoke over duels. If the main dangers are AT guns and mines, it's rational to smother firing nodes with batteries and breach minefields with engineers rather than butt heads on direct fire. The fifth theme, the Sherman as a poor shooter, criticism of the 75mm gun versus long-barreled enemy guns ignores the mission. For combined arms fighting in villages, hedgerows, and urban blocks, commanders needed versatility, credible HE effect, large ammunition supply, fast turret traverse, a stabilizer, and comfortable comms with infantry. The 76mm with APCR improved duel odds but weakened HE performance. Commanders distributed vehicles by task, balancing the company's mix to time and place. In the end, effectiveness was measured not by penetration at 1 kilometer, but by the number of strongpoints cracked and intersections held. The sixth block is the role of communications in success metrics. FM radio nets, intercom, and standardized call-for-fire procedures slashed the friction of war. You won't see it in a museum hall, but it's obvious in unit journals. The time from detection to first salvo shrinks. The number of lost squads falls. Flank coordination becomes routine, rather than the feat of an enterprising sergeant. Any argument about the best tank that ignores this network fabric is a chart without axes. The seventh topic is ammunition and fuel logistics. Yes, a gasoline engine demanded fire safety discipline, but gasoline supply lines were large-scale and predictable, and consumables were standardized. In ammunition, the key metric wasn't a rare silver bullet, but a steady flow of mass HE shells, smoke, and grenades to solve real tasks. A wide-throat system beats a perfect round system when a war lasts months. Then comes the eternal kill ratio question. Who killed whom and in what proportion sounds dramatic and misleads easily. At company and battalion level, victory wasn't measured by the enemy's tank kill count, but by mission completion. Cut a lane, close a pocket, hold a highway, throw a bridge, keep the tempo. The Sherman proved handy precisely because it served that logic. It had enough accuracy to smash a window, the comms to call a battery, and the repairability to return tomorrow. Together, that yielded the strategic metric, a sustained ability to attack.
What about popular writing? On one pole are dramatic crew memoirs where every flash becomes a symbol. On the other pole are academic studies where numbers lie flat in tables. An honest narrative reconciles the poles. Memoirs see the grains of pain but lose scale. Tables see scale but lose the air of battle. A balanced picture shows how individual crew risk is reduced by the system. Wet stowage, refined recovery processes, standardized repair, a dense artillery umbrella, and radios that don't fail in the rain. The conclusion doesn't erase tragedies, but explains victory. The Sherman wasn't a knight without fear or reproach. It was the workhorse of a network. What made it a winner wasn't centimeters of armor or a magical caliber, but a unit's repeated ability to reach a phase line on time, suppress a node with fire, bypass, consolidate, and do it again tomorrow. The metrics are simple: time to return to service, share of vehicles restored after damage, average time to call and shift fires, and steadiness of march tempo. In those dry lines lies the answer to emotional myths. Look ahead. Modern platforms are heavier and smarter, but the lesson is the same. Victory comes not from absolute dueling power, but from a system's ability to turn individual losses into brief pauses and targets into tasks executed on schedule. Where myths demand heroic showdowns, metrics quietly count the minutes given back by comms, repair, and artillery. Those minutes are what made the Sherman a machine of victory.